Hello, hello, and welcome to Temple of the False Pod, where decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
And, we wanted to talk, we wanted to take things simple, go back to the basics a little.
I'm back in my usual location.
Yeah, look at you, back in that hallway. We wanted to. Bruce came up with this brilliant idea that we would.
Whoa!
I'm putting all the pressure on you if this fails.
Wow, selling it hard.
Bruce came up with this idea where we would just kind of sit back, talk about the color. We would take an episode each season, talk about a color, what they're known for,
right?
Especially now. And talk about, whether it makes sense, whether it helps the solidification of the color pie, and where we see this color make itself prominent, I guess, is
right.
So we wanted to start today with an episode dedicated to the most medium color of all. Green. Start
Green.
right in the middle. Unless you're going Wooberg order, and then it's reverse. But we wanted to start with green. Green, for those who don't know, is one of the 5 main colors of Magic. One of the 5 colors of Magic. And
if you don't know what green is for Magic, then I'm shocked
then you've never played Magic.
Then you've somehow stumbled upon this podcast / YouTube show.
Yes, and welcome to Magic. Green's known for big stompy boys.
Yeah,
that's like its tag is like, we got the big ones.
We got the big ones, and we also have what is necessary to play the big ones.
Right. So, for those
we'll get to this in a minute.
Yeah. So, yeah, green's all about getting a lot of mana and using that mana efficiently. Surprise.
Yeah.
And it seems like everything they do is based around those 2 core concepts, I guess. All right, it's really one concept. Make enough money to use it,
Yeah.
Man, green.
All of green's good stuff costs more. Well, what does green do best? Make more. So green makes gets you a ton of mana, and allows you to cast what the best spells in green. That just makes sense. It wouldn't make any sense to have a color where all of your good stuff costs a lot, but you have no way to reach that cost.
Yeah, for sure. I think with green, it's even the cards that are like, go find a land, put it into your hand. Like, those are still like really getting the game going early. Like,
right.
Those spells usually cost less, sure. But, like, it is getting you to where you need to be to then do the big, ugly things.
Right. Right. And, I mean, I also don't, I don't want to turn this episode into a pedantic discussion of what counts as mana ramp. It's like, oh, but you're putting the land in your hand, so it's not really ramp. It's like, whatever. It's getting you to the point in the game where you want to be as fast as possible.
Yeah. If you're going to be mad that we're talking generically about ramp as ramp and fixing, then let us know, because I won't read it.
I will.
Oh, okay. And then we'll have an episode where Bruce is just in tears. And that'll be the blue episode.
There we go.
So we brought 3 main tenets of green that aren't just trample and big boys. Because green is also known for trample, if you didn't know. But we have three main topics we want to cover, and we'll see how they all fit together. Because green is a beautiful magical color that all cares about growth. So we've got the first topic we're going to cover is fighting. This with red especially are the two like main colors in what we have colloquially known as fighting. It's when a creature does damage to another creature and vice versa in non-combat ways.
Right. Well, I mean, let's just go with something real basic here. Affectionate Indrik.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
4/4 creature. It's a beast. It says, when Affectionate Indrik enters the battlefield, you may have it fight target creature you don't control. So essentially what happens, this creature that you control has a fight with a creature that you don't control. They each deal their power, or a fight where each deals damage equal to its power to the other. So your Indrik takes 4, or your Indrik deals 4, and their creature deals their power back to the Indrik.
I forgot that fight was keyworded.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Right. I mean, actually, probably the most famous fight creature is probably Apex Altosaur, just because of the way it works. So,
Apex Altosaur, for those who don't know,
is
a monster.
Yes.
It says it's a 10/10. It says when Apex Altosaur enters the battlefield, it fights up to one target creature you don't control. And then it has Enrage, so when it's dealt damage, it fights. So when it fights, it's dealt damage. So then it fights again and again until it has no more life force.
Yeah, essentially until it's dead or there isn't an opposing creature that has power.
Yeah.
So it's funny because probably the most famous creature with fight on it essentially is quasi-mass removal for green, as opposed to a fight mechanic, which initially at least was seen as green's way of doing removal. Green as a color is not supposed to have creature removal. It doesn't. You rarely get cards that say, rarely get a green card that just says destroy target creature. You can get green cards that say exile the creature, give them a counter, or give them a token. You can find, ideally greens. The solution for green to get rid of other creatures is to attack the opponent and make them block, or block their creature and kill it that way. So Wizards came up with the fight mechanic as a way to sort of make it a little easier for green to get rid of creatures that your opponent is not going to include in combat. They're just not going to include that creature in combat because they don't want it dead. So green, the ability to fight opens it up so that green can actually get rid of a creature, as opposed to allowing your opponent to be the one who decides when their creature dies.
Yeah.
So, Andy, what do you think of fight?
I think fight's great. I really like fight as a mechanic. I like that it depends on you doing the thing green wants to do, which is play big creatures. Now, when this gets out of hand is when you're playing against, say, like a Death Touchy deck. Or, where it gets even more out of hand is when you're playing a Death Touchy deck and you have a bunch of fight things.
Right.
And Wizards' response to this essentially was the bite, quote-unquote, mechanic. Bite, for those who don't know, is like a one-sided fight based on the sorcery Rabid Bite, which says target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So it's fighting, but the other creature doesn't do the damage back.
Right.
Great in Death Touch stuff, which green is also known for. But trying to keep things on fight, fighting, I don't know. It does an aggressive thing and relies on you doing the green thing, which is like, if people are playing a lot of creature hate, then great. Like, fighting isn't too OP or anything, but I'm stuck because fighting relies on you having big creatures.
Yeah.
But why don't you just send those in and then fight? And I mean, that's like a good way to think about it. But also, if they're not blocking with their creatures, you're getting right in. Wonderful. Mm-hmm. But then, what there then begs the question, why bother killing their creatures? You'll have, instances where their creatures are affecting the board in some way that really, for whatever reason, your combat isn't doing enough to affect the game.
Right.
Right.
Well, and that's kind of that's really when I like fight.
Mm-hmm.
I like the idea that if I'm holding a card that allows one of my creatures to fight one of your creatures, I can look at it and say, okay, well, the creature I want to get rid of is your 1/1, but you will not attack or block with it because it's valuable to you and there's a reason I want it dead and you want it alive. So I'm like, all right, so I can either use it now to get rid of the creature, but it puts a point of damage on my creature before I go to combat. So when I swing, or when I decide to go to combat, am I now not going to attack with my creature because that 1 point of damage suddenly makes it vulnerable?
Mm-hmm.
Or do I want to swing in, do 4 points of damage to something, take 3, and then use my fight thing to go after your 6/3? Because I know I'll kill it, and yes, you're going to do 6 damage and kill my creature, but you only need to do 1. I got double activity. So the idea is that it forces you to look at the board state and decide, is this better to do now or later? And I like cards like that. I like abilities like that sort of, when you should use it is not prescribed in stone. Ideally an instant, you want to wait until the last possible moment to use it. That's the whole point of having an instant, is that you can wait. But sometimes it's better to just use it right away. And I think the fight mechanic is it's all over. Sometimes you do want to use it right away. Sometimes you want to wait till after combat. It just sort of goes everywhere. My real issue with the fight mechanic is more a case of, it's disappointing to me that that my 6/6 with trample doesn't do any spillover damage. Trample is irrelevant when you fight. You're just doing the damage to the other creature.
Yeah.
So trample doesn't do anything. First strike, which admittedly most green creatures don't have, first strike doesn't do anything. It's a fight. You each take your shot. I mean, the fight is essentially the two of you standing there and you each get to punch each other in the face once and nobody's going to even try and stop you.
Yeah.
But all your other abilities don't do anything. But wait, Death Touch does.
Mm.
So I find that part of the fight for me is a little bit frustrating because I would like to see the other abilities play into it a little. But again, I mean, it becomes a situation where, maybe you're trying to deal with your opponent's first strike creature. Well, fight's a great way to do that because now they're the ones who are losing the creatures. So it's all about, the flexibility that's involved with it or the hoops you have to jump through. And I'm a big fan of cards that don't just make it real easy. Like there's one obvious solution, or it just handles the entire situation. There's nothing else you need to worry about.
Yeah, it definitely does that nicely in terms of it fills the gaps of like you said, it does it's difficult for your keywords, but it's nice that it negates theirs. So it does feel like it's the solution to a problem, in some ways, and it's not the solution in other ways. Yeah. So fight is, I like it. I really I had a fight deck based around Halana and Elena, the two separate ones, the ones with partner, not not Halana and Elena partners. The two separate partner commanders from Commander Legends. And the green one, I believe, is Halana. She says, like, when a creature comes into play, you can pay 2 to have it fight, I think. Something. Maybe it's punch. Uh-oh. Yeah, it punches. Or bites. Okay. But, like, it is, in essence, is a very similar idea.
Right.
I would say most of the time fighting and biting are the same. Obviously, they're not. Obviously, there's a huge delta of difference. But, with my Halana and Elena deck... Halana and Elena? Is that correct? Yeah. I don't know why it just started sounding weird in my head. But with my Halana and Elena deck, it was about doing the green thing, which was making big creatures and having them punch or fight. It had a bunch of fight cards in it because they're, you've got instant speed, you've got, cheap, you've got expensive. It's well produced at this point.
Right.
Which is obviously why they got into biting more. I like it as a mechanic.
Yeah, and I think there's all sorts of varieties and variants that they can use. They just need to be careful to make sure that, they don't let green wander too far away from this.
I would like to see more what I've heard as butt fighting, where it does damage equal to its toughness. But I've also been working on a tree folk deck lately. So.
Yes. Well, there you go. My personal one of my favorite little twists that I've seen on the fight mechanic is Barroom Brawl. Barroom Brawl is 1 and a green. It's a sorcery. Target creature you control fights target creature the opponent to your left controls. Then, that player may copy this spell and may choose new targets for the copy, which, in a multiplayer game, is joyful. I mean, how far are other folks willing to go?
And I love that it doesn't stop when it gets back to you. Like, it just continues.
Well, it stops when somebody decides, I'm not going to fight.
I like too that it's on resolution that the next person goes. Like it's not like you're building up a stack. It just like it clears the stack. It's a new thing, and then the copy is made.
Yes.
And
so I fight your thing. Now you have a thing.
Yeah.
What are you
the only
do
thing I don't like about this card is that it's not like choose left or right. Like it's solely dependent on your place at the table, which I like, but it has no flexibility, which I don't like. But
this card brings chaos to a fight, which is why Barroom Brawl is a perfect name for it. This is very chaotic.
I love it.
Yeah, who knows? Make it work. It'll be crazy.
Thanks, Tim Gunn.
Yep.
Up next, let's go to break, and
Sure.
then after, when we get back from break, we're going to talk about a big thing and then a small thing.
Sounds good.
So if you're intrigued by that description, you won't want to leave. So come back after break. We'll be right back.
This episode of Temple of the False Pod is brought to you by Regeneration.
What?
Wizards don't do that no more.
This episode of Temple of False Pod is brought to you by Indestructible. Regeneration for a new generation. This episode of Temple of False Pod is brought to you by Titan of Industry. Explain to me how Titan of Industry is green. We're back.
Hey.
Talking about the windy city of green. Don't ask me how it relates to Chicago, but green. We talked about fighting and biting and that whole
sounds like the Itchy and Scratchy show.
Exactly. They bite, they fight, bite,
fight and fight,
bite.
Fight.
You're right. You're right. This joke has gone on too long.
All right, so next topic.
Next topic is growth. Through our research, our well-documented, intensive, and encyclopedic research of the color green in Magic the Gathering trading card game, we discovered that green is apparently known for temporary growth, which we agree, but we also have problems with. For as long as I've played the game, green has been also the color, one of the main colors of counters, +1/+1 counters, etc.
Well, I mean, for the longest time, green wasn't.
Right.
Wasn't about the counters. Simply put, giant growth is an alpha. The idea that a single card cast at a spot in time gives one of your creatures a burst so they're bigger.
Right.
And it's usually power and toughness.
Like, giant growth was like the 1 mana for 3 thing, right? Like, it was part of that cycle along with Ancestral Recall.
It was the absolute key. And then every set after that had some variant of that. Take your pick. +2/+2 and regenerate, or get an energy counter, or it was usually somehow tied to one of the themes of that set. But that was always in there, always, to the point where I think it basically still is. The real issue, though, isn't that it's not there anymore. It's that we're now also seeing plenty of situations where green offers a +1/+1 counter. And that's significantly different. That's permanence. That's that's going to be a while.
And I mean, like, usually with that, like, permanent growth, so like with the temporary growth, it is a lot of like sorceries and instants, combat trick type stuff, and then with the permanent growth, it's usually when it's paired with a different color. You've got the Simic with Adapt. You've got a lot of green and white +1 counter stuff with a lot of the Selesnya stuff, but it's still like fairly heavy in green. I think that, like, what's interesting is that it does, like, I don't know if I didn't think of checking this when when we were talking about it before the episode, but with the growth stuff, I don't know whether it's becoming more popular or more common, I guess, to have the permanent growth, or if just because sheer value we see more of it. And my instinct is to think that it may be growing at the same rate. You've got like things like Gift of Growth or Colossal Growth. Colossal Growth, is it's 1 in a green instant, gives +3/+3 till end of turn. That makes sense. But it also is kicker for red. And if the spell was kicked, it gets +4/+4 and trample and haste until end of turn. So it's like, it's very much like those cards are still around.
Right. Well, Andy, you were asking at one point. You said, I haven't done any research on this. Well, okay. I just looked. So green only cards. So we're not talking Simic, we're not talking Selesnya here, where you could pretend that it's the other color that's providing the ability for green to put a counter. 56 cards. And I mean, it just goes on and on. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control if it's legendary. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, it gains Reese. Put a +1/+1. Put 9 +1/+1 counters on a target land you control. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and that's battle growth from Mirrodin.
Yeah,
this is something that's been going on for a while. And these are all instants. So it's there. Bounty of the Hunt from Alliances put counters on a creature.
Yeah,
it's just,
and I guess what I mean more of is like, is it outpacing the like giant growth effects? You know, is it, or are they both? Like, I mean, I would rather have a counter than, you know, temporary growth any day.
Right, and I think what we're seeing is our bias as Commander players.
Right.
We rarely want to see a creature get a benefit that they lose within the turn.
Right.
So, I would much rather pay 1 green and get a single +1/+1 counter on a creature than pay 1 green and get +3/+3 until the end of the turn. That's not good enough in Commander. Commander, you want... Well, I mean, I want something that's going to be long-term.
Yeah.
Whereas I can see how in Limited, even in Constructed, where you've got a much smaller card pool, getting that bonus makes more sense. Those are both formats where you're only trying to do 20 damage to one opponent. Having that burst where that can do all that damage in one swing makes sense. Your creatures don't get to hit for 3-4 turns in a row. So getting a counter on it might not be as good as getting +3/+3 for a turn. And it also means that your fight mechanic actually kicks in and works even a little bit better if you can get that bonus until the end of the turn. So
right. And I think that like it's interesting to think of green as like I think it comes naturally, right, as this idea that it is about, you know, not only making big creatures but making creatures bigger.
Right.
I think that it's this duality that like it just wants big power, big toughness. It doesn't really care too much more about like other things. It just wants the one thing, and it's disgusting. And I think like it's, I don't know, like, you know, even going back to fighting. Fighting wants you to have bigger creatures because then they'll survive. And even in the case of Apex, why can't I remember? Apex Altasaur, great.
Yeah.
Even in the case of Apex Altasaur, like, it's already a 10/10, so it's huge. And sure, it's a 9 mana creature, but green has that covered. And so like you're fighting, and there's very few chances you're only going to be fighting one thing. The only time you're going to be fighting one thing is if there's a 10/10 on board and it's the only thing, you know? Right. Or if there is just generally one thing on board. But with temporary growth effects, and even so much as the ubiquity of counters, because I think that we are headed into a problem with counters as much as we were in a problem with treasures and still tend to be. I think that Wizards has maybe gone overboard with treasures. I mean,
what?
Well, yes, but maybe gone overboard with counters. I like that with Ikoria we got new types of counters. I think that, and even so much as in New Capenna, we got shield counters.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of playing around with the tools that they have, which are, you know, new keywords,
right,
etc. And I think that green. You know, people have been saying it for years. Green has just become good at everything. And I think that's true. I think that it's easy to build a generically good deck with green, because it does the game actions simply. There's less of like a sacrifice to do anything as there are with other colors.
So I think green does everything well when the circumstances or when the situation, when green has had a chance to create a situation where it does work.
Yeah.
So
it feels like the win more color. Yeah. Card draw.
I mean,
perfect.
So much of what green does relies on green already having big creatures out there.
Yeah.
So if you already have the big creatures out there, it means you're probably swinging with them. And if you're playing in green and you've got big creatures, they probably have trample. So you're already on the way. Now, because you're already on the way, you now also have access to drawing a lot of cards. You have access to being able to effectively fight and kill off specific creatures. I mean, if green doesn't have the big creatures, so if there's a mass destruction spell, now suddenly green can't do anything to stop their opponents from doing things. They can't draw their way out of the problem. They're basically just waiting to draw another big creature so that they can then use that and parlay that into the other things that they need.
Yeah.
So it's like green is really good when it's strong. And when it's not really good at getting you there, other than by saying, do you need ramp? And it's like, well, no, I got the ramp. Now I need to draw. I need a creature, because I already in my hand I have a way to draw cards, but it's only if I have a creature and I don't. And I have a way to do, to get rid of my opponent's troublesome cards, but I need a creature out to be able to do it.
Right.
So I'm just looking for a creature, but I have no way to draw into it. So I'm just flipping off the top, hoping to find a creature. And that's not always good, but, a lot of times it just is good. So
yeah, and I think that, like, have you seen the new Game Nights Live, the one from Minneapolis?
No.
Oh, okay. Green takes a big part of this game, because there's a point where one of the contestants, every time they play a creature, they draw like 6 cards.
Right.
Like, it gets to be that point where it's like, all right, like, you're already doing the thing that green wants to do, and drawing cards is only going to, like, fuel that engine.
Yeah.
And it ends up feeling more win-more-y.
Yes.
But, like, green on its own also fuels ways to get there. So it's like, it's got the first half figured out and the last half figured out. And, like, if you can contain that middle part of, like, holding your board presence, it needs you to have a big board presence to do the bigger things that make you seem more of a threat. And I mean, like, I think it's perfectly, like, it's perfectly encapsulated in the fact that, you've got, Shamanic Revelation, which draws a card for each creature you control. So if you've gone wide, you can draw a lot of cards. But, like, if you've already gone that wide, you're generally doing pretty good. And then you've got, Call of the Wild Speaker? Where it's the inverse, where it's draw a card for the highest power? I think it is, among non-humans. No, what is it called? It's something of the Wild Speaker. Return of the Wild Speaker. Okay. So it says, choose one, draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control. So for it to be good, generic magic card, like, need to be good, be in good position. But, like, if you're doing good, this card does the thing it wants to do, of course. But
Right.
I feel like it ends up feeling win more because you're already in a position where you have a commanding presence.
Right.
And yeah, I feel like green's card draw, while being very good, does ring more of win more unless you're doing it with another color, which
Right.
just obviously complicates matters. But I mean, like, that's why Simic has been seen as like such like a powerhouse for the past, I mean, the 5 years I've been playing, and
Right.
probably longer. But like, they're getting these cards all the time, where it's like, commanding presence, here, have, well, presence.
Right.
And I think that it's interesting how the three of these topics kind of meld together, because it is just all dependent on having high power or toughness, but generally power creatures,
Right.
which does just fit that color pie. It feels like they look at a mechanic, they want to put it in a color, so they look at the basis of that color, which for green is big creatures, and they figure out how to weave it into a card, you know?
Right. Well, I mean, so much of the way Magic is developed is each color has their core, their core. Now, take the new thing that you've got for this set and apply it to that core.
Right.
So, your +3/+3, make it, you know, how does that make sense in this set? You know, how do we draw cards in this set if the focus of the set is on, you know, is on whatever, and just go that route? Or if we've created a new keyword, how can we make that work in this? And it's just simply applying that and then spitting out the cards.
Yeah.
You know, because I do feel like there's a lot of sets where I look at the cards and I'm like, great, I have that card, but my version of the card doesn't, you know, give me an energy counter. It does something else.
Right. And I think it's
But
funny
it
too.
still
'cause
does the core of what I
Yeah.
want.
I didn't even mention with Return of the Wild Speaker the second mode, which is Wild Growth. But like I guess it's somewhere between Wild Growth and Overrun. Non-human creatures you get or control get +3/+3 until end of turn. So it just harkens back to that other pillar of green. And I think new mechanics in general, like I love seeing a new card, and seeing like, oh, I see how they made this. You know, like, not necessarily with Return of the Wild Speaker, but the other things that you're talking about, where it's like, oh, like this is clearly set mechanic stapled to creature or stapled to whatever. And I think that it's, you know, it's a good way to go. It proves to be memorable. It proves to be, you know, somewhat balanced.
Right.
But I don't know where I was going with that.
Well, I think you got there.
Oh, good. And I think that like with green in particular, it's easy to just be like, oh, like they green gets everything, and it's like, well, green wants to do things simply, right? Green wants to get to do the game actions in the least amount of steps.
Right.
It wants to be a very simple version of like if you have mono green versus mono green, you know what you're getting out of the game. That can't really be said with mono blue. Mono green wants creatures, big ones, to attack each other or to attack the opponent. And like, I feel like with most, if not all, of green's recent mechanics, it falls into that trapping, I guess, of like it's either going to make your thing bigger or it's going to benefit from having a bigger thing.
Right.
Going to move on from wording.
By thing, you mean creature.
Yes. And I think that, like, with power creep, I'm going to say the big bad word. I think with power creep, it is only going to go up, in terms of, like, the way that green does that. And I think that it's easy to recognize power creep in green over other things because it is just so simple,
Right. I think the part about power creep, it's bad enough when you look at what green does and you watch and you see how, oh, look, now they've got a new spell that they've or something else they've stapled onto this, so it makes it just that much stronger, that much better, this much, all this. And then you go the other route, and then they start, and I appreciate that this was done especially for Commander, but Old Nabo now exists. A 7/7 flying creature in green. One, that all by itself is kind of questionable. Green is not supposed to have a lot of big flying creatures. They're supposed to have creatures with reach. So they can stop your flyers, but they don't get to fly over your opponent and do that. Old Nawbone does. And then it says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, which is a very green thing. Green has trample, so even if they get blocked, they're probably getting some damage in. Create that many treasure tokens. Like, green doesn't already have enough ways to get mana? Do we really need... Is this where we needed to go? Green needed to encroach on the ability to make treasure tokens. Because all that's happening here is, one, you're giving green more mana, or two, you're giving green a bunch of artifact tokens. I'm not saying what can be done with that. I'm not saying green is good at sacking tokens to do something else, but you're giving green a bunch of artifact tokens. It's going to be able to do something with this stuff.
Right. Especially where, like, we've only been seeing green interact with their own artifacts in the past couple of years,
Right.
And I think with Old Nawbone, the thing that gets me is that it says whenever a creature, like, I think if they had dialed it back with Old Nawbone, even just a little, it would have been like, nobody would be talking about it, because if it was whenever this creature deals combat damage, you get that many treasures, or you get a treasure if a creature does deal, like,
when a creature deals combat damage to an opponent, you get a treasure.
Right. And, like, I think with that, it would be good, for go wide strategies, because then you get a lot of treasures.
And that's something green is supposed to still be able to do. I understand white is now supposed to be the dominant color type of small token creatures. But practically speaking, for Commander, green still does this. So going wide, you could still make a pile of treasures. But it forces that strategy, as opposed to Old Nawbone, which is like, oh, you're going wide? I bet you Old Nawbone would go good in your deck. Oh, you've just got a couple of creatures, but they're really big? Why don't you run Old Nawbone? That'll get you more mana. When shouldn't you run this card?
It's so interesting, too, because specifically with Old Nawbone, I feel like they either learned or were prescient of the issues that it could cause, because then they created the Reaver Cleaver, which is a fairly similar thing stapled onto an equipment, but in red. And you know how many people I've heard talk about the Reaver Cleaver compared to Old Nawbone?
Right.
Like...
Right. Because green's not supposed to get this.
Right.
Green gets all the mana it needs with spells like Cultivate and Kodama's Reach and 101 other options.
Yeah.
So
I think with green being a part of the color pie, a lot of the things that green does, are interconnected, are related, have synergistic qualities about them, which is quite honestly intentional. Like it is very much like, this is how green's going to work, and it's going to work together because that's the green way. A lot of other colors, like for instance red, a lot of the red keywords aren't necessarily as synergistic because green is about synergy, or at least like flavorfully about synergy. And it's real cool to see how that grows with obviously the popularity of the game, but also like with just, they need to create new things. And so it's always interesting to see how they balance green, or don't fail to balance green, with every new set, because they have to come up with something new,
Right. Well, the interesting part is, if you make old Nawbone, don't change a thing. Except instead of treasure tokens, it makes food tokens. Green has a pile of mana. You can cash in those food tokens for life if you want. You can run them in other stuff. It means that any deck that cares about food tokens, that's where old Nawbone wants to go most. Using treasure just means that it's everywhere. It's a little frustrating. But either way.
Yeah. I think the thing with old Nawbone, and I think it feels weak in terms of like a stance, but with old Nawbone, it's a 7/7 for 7 that can be your commander, and in green it's easy to get to 7. But part of me wants to be like, well, they could have made it literally any other color, but old Nawbone is an established character in the lore of the Forgotten Realms of being a green dragon, and I'm just like, yeah, but like I don't know, make it a red creature, but it could still be a green. I don't know. It just feels flimsy in terms of like why they made it green, or why didn't they make it, I don't know, 10 mana.
Look, and I get the lore aspect, so I understand why it's a 7/7 flying dragon in green, even though it shouldn't be in green, but it's a green dragon. It has to be green. Right. I get all that. It's the treasure that puts me over the top.
Yeah.
This is not something that green needs or should have. And you could have made it more flavorful. You could have made it into something else. They chose not to. They chose to go into treasures with this. And it just sort of continues to feed the idea that treasures are being overused. And I know that Wizards has said repeatedly that they're backing down on this. It's going to take us a while to see it because, of course, they're running almost 2 years ahead.
Yeah.
Great.
So we should see a decline in treasures coming up this summer. So that's nice.
Right. But in the meantime, we're playing this format where these cards never go away.
Yeah.
Wizards needs to understand that you make the mistake is there forever. Smothering Tithe is never going away until it gets banned in Commander, or until it gets, or until you make something even better.
Right.
So, when you make a card like this, just know this is what's going to happen, and there's just no way that they made this card and didn't know what kind of response we were going to get.
Yeah.
But either way,
I think as we wrap up for this episode, I think that it's important to keep the 3 pillars of new green in mind, and how they all relate to the monolith that is big boy creature time of green.
Right.
We've got fight, card draw, and growth. They're all synergistic in a beautiful, natural way. And next season we'll talk about another color. Who's to say what it is? Except for us. We've got a couple more episodes this season, and I want to thank everybody who's new to the show, who's come back from, any break with the show. I want to thank everybody who's listened week after week. We see you. We see you out there. Thank you. And next week, I think we've got a deck tale. Oh my God! Woo! Bruce sees all of you. We got a deck tale coming up next week. It's going to be a fun time. And so, all in all, see y'all next week. Thank you for listening. We're Temple of a False Pod. Where decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
And go play some green. Go brew some green. Go play less green. You know what it does. It's simple. It's a good magic color. 1 of 5, in fact. I've had too much coffee, so I'm gonna go. Have a great night, and may your 5th land be the temple.
Bye.
Wait. Before you go, just wanted to say thank you for listening. You can reach out to us via email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com or on Twitter @falsepodmtg. Bruce is @manaburned, and I'm @AndyWeekend, though you'll definitely notice I use the podcast Twitter far more often. Now that we've got you here, make sure you subscribe, rate us on whatever podcast platform you use. It helps us out. It gets us more reach. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. Like a video there. Leave some comments for more casual enjoyment. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with some more timeless discussions about all things casual. So come hang out, and may your 5th land be the temple. Bye-bye. Should I do my best, Bruce? Bye!